When you start leading others, you don't get that intrinsic reward or that good feeling from accomplishing something yourself anymore. And you've got to make that shift from getting that reward when you see your team succeed.
Welcome to Elevate Utah.
Utah's #1 growth podcast.
I'm Court Brady.
I am Carlos Souza.
And today we have Brian Tenney. Pumped to have you, bro.
Thank you. It's fun to be here.
On this podcast, we talk to the entrepreneurs and the movers and shakers in Utah, and you are one of those entrepreneurs. Your background, so you have one of the shortest LinkedIns of everyone we've had on. You went from snowboard instructor at Brighton to CEO of a $1,000,000 company and Microsoft 2024 Partner of the Year. So that was like a massive ascent from snowboard instructor to CEO of a 200-person company. So we're going to digest that today.
Okay. I don't do a great job of laying all that out, but there was a lot.
I assume maybe a couple of steps in between.
Yeah.
We're going to go through that journey with you, and then we're also going to talk about a principle. And every single podcast we send out a text. What's something you're interested about, a principle or something you feel expert in? And I loved your response. You said, what I want to talk about is the importance of people feeling understood as it relates to leadership, sales, or any relationship. So we're going to dive into both of those things. Let's first start with your journey. How did you start at Journey Team?
Yeah, so I don't think I have the normal entrepreneurship. I don't even know that I even really consider myself an entrepreneur. But kind of a different journey. So I'm a second generation family business. So my dad started the company 30 years ago. And somewhere along the line when I was a little kid, I went with him somewhere to meet a client or something. I think I was in the car after soccer practice or something, right? We stopped by a client. And he'll dispute this. We've kind of debated whether this really happened or not, right? But we stopped by a client and somewhere along the conversation said, are you going to grow up and take over your dad's company? I thought, yeah, sure, maybe, right? And when we went out to the car, he kind of ripped me a new one. He's like, dude, you're not going to be an entitled, like, just silver spoon kid. Like, you're going to go do your own thing. You're not taking my company. This is my thing. You're going to go do your own thing, right? And so I grew up my whole life thinking, okay, when I grow up, I'll go do my own thing. I'm not going to just go into the family business. And so I was a snowboard instructor after high school, super fun year, like, had dreams of being a pro snowboarder. I don't think I was ever good enough to do that. But I was boarding 6 days a week. Left, went on an LDS mission.
Where'd you go?
Venezuela, Caracas. Wild experience.
Nice.
And we can talk about that if you want.
Was it as wild then as it is now?
Yeah, I was down there when they had the coup on Chavez. I was down there when they socialized the oil industry and it shut the whole city down. I mean, it's like
2010.
2001 to 2003.
Okay.
So in like 2002, they socialized the oil industry, right? And we're getting off track. Sorry, we're getting off track. But so I was in Caracas. That whole city went into chaos in 2 days, right? So day one, you ran out of gas. All the store shelves were emptied by the end of the day. You don't have gas to bring food into the city. And it was total civil unrest for like a week and a half. Just wild to see, like,
so COVID was like peanuts compared to what you went through in Venezuela.
COVID was very different, right? And it's different being in a South American country versus Utah, right? But it's just amazing, like, how thin that veil of civility is, or like how close we are to like civil unrest. Because Salt Lake's probably not much. We're a little different, right? I think people here culturally have more food storage and different stuff than I think you do down there, but. Yeah, it was.
That's intense.
Taught me a lot. Great experience. Loved the people down there. It was awesome.
There's a quote from that show Silo, and he says the only thing that separates order from chaos is 9 meals. It's like, oh, that's a fair point.
Down there, it felt like it was about 4 meals,
and then it was done. Straight to chaos.
It went to chaos.
Wow.
Okay, so you came back, and did you go to BYU before?
No, I didn't do any school before. I just snowboarded. So
what a life.
it was awesome. Yeah, it was fun.
And you still kept that up. You guys have wakeboarding Wednesdays at Journey Team now?
So yeah, I still snowboard some. Trying to get my kids into it still. Like I've got some older kids, and it's probably one of my greater failings as a dad is I wanted to build these little snowboard prodigies. And so when they were like 3 and 4, I went and pushed them really hard, burned them out. And then they're like, Dad, we're not doing this. And so now later years, I've come back as like the more reasonable, rational father and said, hey, let's go try it again. I'm not going to push you so hard. And so we can go out and have fun now. Like this year we've gotten into it a little bit, but none of them are going pro. So, and that's great. Like they have their stuff they love and I love it. So anyways, back to the journey. So coming home from that mission, I thought I wanted to go try out to be a pro snowboarder. I was going to go like give a run at it. And I went to go get my job back at Brighton. They're like, hey, when you come back, come get a job. I was going to snowboard the rest of that winter, go down to South America in the summer, and then come back the next year and see if I could like go pro, start competing and doing stuff. And I went back up to Brighton and they're like, hey, bad snow year. There's no tourism. I don't have a job to give you. And I'm like, oh, crap. Like this is like the day after my mission, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I got to figure stuff out. And my dad said, hey, I've got like some random stuff I need done at the company. Why don't you come in as like a little intern, do some work for me while you get ready to go to school? I was going to go to BYU. And so I started working at Journey Team just a little bit, kind of like part-time, doing just random grunt work, like the very bottom of the totem pole. We were like 10 employees at the time, 8 employees, something like that, less than $1 million in revenue. And that's kind of where I got my start, doing a little bit of stuff. And then I went down to college, wasn't really working. I was just doing BYU. And I started taking some marketing classes back when like wet SEO, pay-per-click were pretty new. And so I hit up my dad and said, hey, I'm bored at school. Let me build you a website. Let me try some of this SEO stuff on your company, just see what happens. And I kind of had this idea that I'd go maybe build a marketing agency when I got out of school, and that would be the business I went and did. And I wanted to try some stuff. And so built a website, did some SEO, and he started getting some clients out of it. Like it started working for his little business. He was getting some traction. And so when I was getting ready to graduate, I was thinking about what I was going to do. And he said, hey, why don't you just come keep doing this marketing thing for a couple years? Then you can go do your own thing.
It's due to change just a little bit.
Yep, that 2 years changed. So I came in with the company pretty small, started as like marketing, and then just over the years just kind of transitioned through different roles in the company. So I started marketing. Pretty soon we started getting enough leads that we needed more sales. I'm like, well, I'll go figure out sales. And so I put on the sales hat and started selling. And then we got some sales, and like you do with any small company of like 10 people, right? Sold some stuff. We're like, well, now we got to go deliver these projects. All right, I'll figure this out. I can deliver these projects. So I did that. And then I was a project manager for a time. And I just kind of went through all the different areas of the company, working different things until my dad had a heart attack 15-ish years ago, probably. I don't know, maybe 12 years ago. I'm terrible at timelines. But when he had the heart attack, we realized like, oh, we don't have anyone who can really run the company if something happens to him. And we'd grown a little bit in that time. And so we kind of got more serious about succession planning and saying, okay, what should happen with this business if something were to happen to him? And I started taking more of an active leadership role. We got a little bit more intentional about that transition. And so I started taking like a sales leadership role, so eventually COO. I was a COO for a long time. And then I kind of ran the company for a lot of years while he still owned it, and then finally bought him out several years ago and made the full transition. Go ahead.
Can you tell us a little bit about, did you have other siblings that were interested in the business? Was that a tricky dynamic? And then you also worked with your dad. You have other employees that are looking, like, walk us through that dynamic.
Yeah. So like I'm very fortunate. My dad was incredible through the whole thing, right? So early on, I think I came in kind of hungry, pushing, wanting to grow the business much more aggressively than he did. He was pretty happy with where things were at. So as you can imagine, like there was some clashing there at times, right? I think as entrepreneurs, when you start a company, like it's your baby, it's everything, right? And then your punk kid comes in and starts calling your baby ugly and saying he wants to change things, and that can be hard at times, right? So we clashed at times. But he was always just super willing to let me try things, let me do things, give me runway. And it created an amazing learning environment for me. And I think really set up the foundation of the culture at Journey Team, where we kind of have this ownership mindset where people feel like they can take control of problems, do things, and not just me, but other people in the company feel like they have that mindset. So back to the family question. So I'm the oldest of 10 kids, so 7 biological kids, and then we've got 3 of my cousins that we consider siblings now too. We pretty much adopted.
So you only have 5 kids, so you got to step it up.
So bro. I know, right?
You're like halfway there.
Yeah. Got a lot of work to do. I think that ship's sailed, man. 5 is a lot. So that family dynamic, I was the oldest, kind of came into the business first, came in when we were small. I have one younger brother that came into the business with me. He's more technically minded. He loves like the tech that we do. And he was always just really good at that. He's got a brilliant mind for it. But he and I worked together a lot in those early days when we were small to kind of grow the company, right? He was one of the people who would stay up with me to pull all-nighters when we had a big project we had to finish, or when we were trying to get a big proposal out or some presentation to a company. He was there with me and helped us grow a lot of that. But when we started talking about eventually the transition of the company, what might happen in the future, he didn't have a lot of interest in buying the company or owning the company. And so we kind of talked. I said, hey, I'm thinking I want to buy this company. I want to make this my career. What do you want to do? He's like, nah, it's not for me. And so we talked about it several times, and he's still with us today, works in the company, but he doesn't have any ownership. And I think that's generally gone pretty well. I mean, there's always tricky dynamics in family business.
Yeah.
Nobody else in the family works in the business, which has been, I think everybody's pretty happy about it, but it's been good.
When you see failures in those sort of transitions, whether it's father to son or founder to the incumbent CEO to the up and coming CEO, what can you most closely relate failure to?
Oh man, probably ego. Like, I think there's a lot of ego involved whenever you're making those transitions, right? So, and I think it's harder probably for founders when they built that and they've just got a very personal connection to that business. But when you're coming in, taking over, like, you want to make decisions, have your runway, go make an impact, do good for your team, do good for your customers. And so I think when I see it, and I've talked to a lot of people on this topic, because as I was going through it, it was a hard several years. And as I've talked to other people that have struggled with it, I think ego is always at play there. I was lucky, like my dad was really good about that. He didn't have a big ego around it. And I think that's why we were able to have a smooth transition. One of the things we talked about a lot before we had the transition was our goal of eventually when we announced the buyout or the transition to the company, everyone could blow it off as like, oh, I figured that already happened, right? And so we kind of intentionally lined it up so that every year I was taking more and more responsibility. He was taking more of a back seat. He was just kind of watching what was going on. And when we eventually made the transaction happen, announced it to the company, and I think largely everyone's like, oh, Brian's already running things. That's already where we're at. Nothing's going to change. I think we did it because of him. I think we did a good job at that. He allowed that to happen.
As you went into a COO role, COOing is very different than selling. Can you talk about how you were able to, did you leverage your skill sets, or did you have to learn a bunch of things in places that you had inadequacies?
So that was a hard transition for me. And certainly had to learn a ton. And I think the biggest challenge for me as I look back on it and think through it is learning to get my intrinsic rewards through seeing others succeed versus having the success myself, if that makes sense. So like when you're selling, it's fun to go close a deal. And you feel that reward, that like, that just feels great when you close a big deal or when you help a customer, when you see something go through. Love that feeling. When you start leading others, you don't get that intrinsic reward or that good feeling from accomplishing something yourself anymore. And you've got to make that shift from getting that reward when you see your team succeed. And I don't think I really understood that for the first little while. And it took me, I still have a natural tendency to want to jump in and solve problems and do things. And now I feel like I've made that transition as I've years and years on the back end of it. But to be able to see your teams close a deal, to see your team help a customer, and to feel good like, oh, hopefully the little bit of coaching I gave or the help I gave them got them there and helped them succeed, and that feels good. Mm-hmm. I think to some degree you're shifting your reward window from like immediate to more longer term, which is hard. But that for me was a big part of that leadership transition.
Was there a particular experience that helped you learn that? Like something that went south and you're like, well, I really need to step back and let the team do it. Was there something?
Yeah. So I can tell you about an experience. I've got a guy on my team who had an idea when we were still fairly small He's one of our sales leaders. He said, hey, I want to build a user conference for Journey teams. He had this vision for this like big tech conference we could do, invite a bunch of customers, present sessions, and teach different technical topics to all of our customers. And he came and he presented this idea. I'm like, dude, Mark, you're crazy. Like, we're not big enough. This will never work. Like, I had all the reasons he was wrong, right? But he came back a couple times. He's like, I really think we can do this. I think we can do it. And finally, I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to let you do it. I'm going to trust you. And I was so wrong. That event was like a huge success. And watching him own that event, take that event and turn it into a success. And like for 10 years, we ran that event, 10 plus years, ran that event. It was a big part of what helped Journey Team grow. It helped grow our brand. It helped us bring in new customers. It helped us better connect with our customers. And it was Mark's vision, Mark's idea for what he could build there allowed us to do it. And if we had listened to me, we never would have done that, right? And I think that was one of those times I'm like, oh, I'm not nearly as smart as I think I am. I don't know everything. And if I'll just get out of the way and let people do their genius, like we're in such a better spot.
How do I know if I'm on the way? Because I feel like I am being the old version of you now, where, you know, I've just taken on as the CEO and I feel like I need to approve every marketing initiative and every sales change in the playbook and ops. How do I know if I'm just standing on the way?
I think that's super hard. And I think you won't ever really know. For me, I have had to be okay with letting people fail and realizing that's part of their learning process. And so let's say that Mark did that event and it failed. It did flop. Maybe I was right. All right, that's fine. Mark grew and Mark learned through that process, right? So when I think through like the early days, when I came into Journey Team and I was an individual contributor and I was learning how to do our business and how to do all these different roles, I screwed up all the time. Mm-hmm. But it was those screw ups that taught me and let me get to the point where I could grow the business and do the things I needed to do. And I think as leaders, it's really hard sometimes to let someone screw up and be okay with it and say, hey, that's just an investment in learning and development. And as long as we have like a good retrospective, we have honesty around, hey, what did we learn from that? Where was the growth mindset and how do we get better? Cool. I'm fine that we screwed up. That's great. Take Elon Musk's approach to blowing up a bunch of rockets to learn how to make really cool rockets, right? It's all just learning. And as I've learned to approach it from that standpoint, it's been easier for me to let them go do their thing and say, hey, if it screws up, fine, we'll learn from it, we'll get better. If it's a success, cool, I was wrong. Either way, like, it's part of the growing of the organization and the people.
It seemed like from my approach, well, from what you just said, Brian, it seemed like horizon, like lengthen your time horizon from what's the immediate effect of this action succeeding or failing compared to what's the long-term result of letting this person go through the process and learn. The other thing that comes to mind is as I started stepping away from Aspen, I let everything go. I just said, I kind of took that approach, not a que sera, sera approach, but I've surrounded myself with people who I think are more capable than me. And I found myself biting my tongue more than speaking. And in some ways that was really, really helpful. But in other ways, fundamentally, I was passionate about how the business culturally needed to exist. And it was going in a different direction. And that was the stuff I wish I would have spoken up about.
Yeah. So I believe there's a responsible way to transfer ownership, like when you're doing these things. And I've screwed it up both ways. There's times I haven't given enough ownership to the person to go do things and let them fail and learn. And there's other times where I've maybe given them too much and that failure has been catastrophic. And so if you think about, and this is where you need to know your people, know where they're at and what they have the capacity for. You want to stretch them. But if I were to take the wrong person and put him in charge of my entire delivery operations and just say, oh, well, it's okay if they just fail a bunch and they'll eventually get there. If they're not close enough, I'm not being responsible as a leader by giving them enough runway and enough education over time to get them ready to then take the whole thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I try to think a lot about like, what are those steps to fully transfer ownership for different decisions or different areas of the business? What's the decision-making authority for different areas of the business where, hey, if they make a $10,000 mistake, that's fine. If they make a $10 million mistake, well, hey, we probably shouldn't give that person that room yet because that would be catastrophic, right? And so there's times where I've let people make people decisions that I thought, hey, this probably isn't the right thing to do, but I'm going to let them make that decision so they can learn. And that was such a big mistake for them and so painful for them. It didn't become a growing opportunity. It almost just became like almost catastrophic, if that makes sense. And so that's where I had a coach that taught me this responsible transfer of ownership. As I try and look at like how you do that, that's helped me a lot.
It's more of a surgical approach in phases instead of, all right, this is yours now and run, which sounds so simple in theory, but which is what most of us do. We just, hey, this is yours now, run with it, and we expect people.
The dump and run, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, and I've done that before. That doesn't work well, right? We're like, hey, I'm going to step out of sales leadership. You go run sales leadership, and I'm going to kind of ignore it and let you just do it, and good luck. Well, okay, good. That's not going to work very well, right? But hey, I'm going to over time transfer more and more of the responsibility to you, and you're going to make mistakes along the way, and we'll coach and we'll talk about it, but I'm going to help you get there. That, I think, is a much better recipe for success.
How do you create a culture within your company of, I liked what you said. You want to stretch people, but you also talked about giving them the room and opportunity to fail and learn on their own. How do you create a culture of, because what's the right way to phrase this? A culture of ownership and trying new things. Because I feel like a lot of people are just so afraid of making mistakes. How do you create a culture where people are free to try things and make mistakes?
A fantastic question. And honestly, something I feel like we're struggling with as we get bigger, as we add levels of leadership and as we add maybe more accountability or different levels of accountability. I'd say the biggest thing I think that has to happen is from a leadership standpoint, like you have to be okay with those mistakes, especially when they cost you uncomfortable amounts of money. And you have to focus on the learning and the development and celebrate, oh, hey guys, I'm okay with this happening. I let you make the decision. You owned it. That's great. It didn't go how we wanted. What did we learn from it? How does this make us better? I think if you can go back to that without getting mad about, hey, this cost us $1 million or whatever happened, right? I think that's where you back it up, is in the day-to-day actions and the discussions you have with the team, and hopefully allowing that to flow down. Honestly, this is something I feel like I'm still trying to figure out as our company gets bigger. It felt easier when we were 50 people or 100 people. And as we've gotten bigger, I think it's gotten a little harder. But I think a lot of it's just, do you really believe that letting people make mistakes is in their benefit and the org's benefit, and that they're going to get better through that over time? I don't think you can scale without it, right? As good as we'll ever be, and I'm not even that good, I'm only ever going to be one guy. And I can maybe do as much work as 1 or 2 people if I really work hard, but I can never do as much work as 50 people or 100 people. And even if they can only do it 80% of the way I would do it, or 50% of the way I'd do it, that's still better than me having to do all the work, right? If I can teach to the right principles and teach to the right values and let them go do it. Lots of times what I found is after they make some mistakes and after they learn, they get some pain, they're going to get better. We try to implement retrospectives after a lot of things that we do. And I think if you have a system of, hey, after we do an event, after we do a project, after we do meetings in turn, let's have a quick retrospective and say what went well, what didn't go well, and what could we do better? And having some pain plus reflection over time, that's going to equal progress. That Ray Dalio teaches. That's one of Ray Dalio's sayings I like a lot. Pain plus reflection equals progress. You've got to give room for people to feel some pain, create the opportunity for the reflection on that pain, and that's how they're going to progress.
I wish we should need to have another podcast where we just talk about Ray Dalio and Ayn Rand and Ben Hardy and Dan Martell. Phenomenal.
Powerhouses.
I don't know anything myself. I just read a lot of books and try and listen to smart people.
Someone, we had Jane on yesterday, and she said there's no such thing as an original thought. It's just someone's interpretation of a thought that already existed and then repurposed.
But it's amazing how sometimes hearing that thought a different way will make it finally click, right? You're like, oh, that, like, yeah. There's some core, like, universal truths and principles that I think, like, you could look at certain things a lot of different ways and hear it different ways. And sometimes that's what it takes. I'm a slow learner. It takes that for me to learn it.
What you said rings so true, though. You said that it flows down, it trickles down. I don't know, I can't remember exactly the word that you said, from the leadership, allowing your team to make mistakes. I just remembered, and I think I mentioned this in the podcast already, 2-3 years ago, when Court asked me to be the head of sales, I made, within 2 months, I think I made a mistake that cost the company, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 at the time. And then I called Court and said, hey man, I messed up. I bought this product and turned out to be like a fraud.
We bought a list of leads from somebody that just scraped them from a website that we already had access to, but neither of us knew.
$7,000. And then Court just said, well, we just paid tuition. What have we learned from it? And I just always reflect back on that experience. And because he treated me that way, I've always felt like I could treat those under me, not under me, but those that report to me the same way. So I think that's absolutely true. It starts at the top and it trickles down to the front line, probably.
I think you're spot on. Yep.
Brian, we've done some business stuff together. We had one deal that financially didn't end up how either of us wanted it to. And do you have an ego? Like, is it something that you actively work on, or you're just like natural disposition because you're running this massively successful company? And I can't imagine that there aren't some moments where you're on the edge of your seat, fist on the table, like, we have to make this happen, or are you just always calm, collected, Brian?
No, dude, I've got an ego as much or more, I'm sure, than anybody. And this is one thing I've learned recently, and I've gone through this, I feel like this year. I've learned when I'm doing things for me because I want it or because I need it for me, I'm not a good leader. That's the wrong way to lead. Now, I get caught up in that all the time, and I've got to constantly remind myself, like, the role of a leader is not to do this thing for me to be successful. That is my ego, right? Like, hey, I want the win for me. But when I can focus on the people and, hey, I'm here to help serve them and help them be successful, like, I'm such a better leader when I can do that, right? That's what leadership should be. But, oh no, I mess it up all the time. And I think that's my ego.
Can we transition into the principle?
Absolutely.
Any more questions about the journey before we hop into the principle?
I actually have one selfish question, if you don't mind.
On the back of that comment.
No, I've actually, I had this question about 10 minutes ago, and I just held off. I got a call from our sales manager saying, hey, I want to hire your brother. So she knows my brother. And then she said, but I think his progression will be limited because his brother is the CEO of the company. No one will ever respect him. He can grow, he can be good, but no one will respect him because he's the brother of the CEO. You worked with your brother, you worked with your dad. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give me in this situation?
So I think working with family can be an amazing thing, but I think you have to be very intentional and careful with how you do it. In my opinion, I've always held myself and I've held my brother to a higher standard than I would everyone else in the company because we are family, because our dad was the founder. And I think it's maybe not fair to your brother, but I think like, in my opinion, you almost have to be really clear, like, hey, you're going to come in here and there's going to be a certain expectation. There's going to be a certain perception. And the only way to beat that is you've got to hold yourself to a higher standard. And then I think you've got to be very disciplined as an organization, as a company, to make sure no decision is ever made through nepotism. Mm-hmm. I had an experience with this, and hopefully I don't get in trouble for sharing this, but I'll just share it anyways because I think it's kind of pertinent. A few years ago, my project management office director came to me, and said, hey, we got an application for a Jeff Tenney. Do you know a Jeff Tenney? I said, well, I've got a brother named Jeff Tenney. But he didn't tell me he was going to be applying for a job. Like, he hasn't talked to me about wanting to do this. So let me see the resume. Texted my brother, and he's like, oh yeah, I applied, but I didn't want to bring it up through you, right? So he was trying to do it the right way. He didn't want there to be nepotism around it, right? And Mike, my director, says, so what do you want me to do? Do you want me to hire him? I said, is he the best candidate? And he said, no, he's the number 2 candidate. We've got somebody else who's better. I'm like, well, then you got to hire the best candidate, right? That sucks, and I'd love to see my brother make it, but we hired the other guy. And I think in those little examples, you kind of set the standard and the expectation for the business, right? And so I spent some time with my brother, coached him up, and hey, where could you have interviewed better? What experience could you get? And he's doing some stuff on his own to get ready. He came back, interviewed a second time. Unfortunately, barely didn't make it again the second time, right? But he's done a really good job of like understanding, like, hey, we can't have nepotism in the company. That would kill the culture. And also, hey, if you do come in, I'm going to expect more from you, and I'm going to be harder on you, and I'm going to expect the leader to be harder on you than anybody else in the company.
One thing I've been impressed with all of the phenomenal leaders that we've had on the podcast is that they're able to make decisions and calls like that because they've been true to their value stack in the other areas of their life. And so when they're true to this value stack, everyone around them says, yes, this is who this person is. They're being true to their character. This isn't this one-off, or he doesn't have this ulterior motive, but they take you at your word instead of trying to dig in and find out, like, what's he really saying, or does he actually not want me to be here? And that's a really difficult thing to do, have character.
I think it's really hard to do, and I think we have to, like, I screw it up all the time still too, right? Like, I have my principles and my values that I feel are important to me and that I want to live by. That doesn't mean I get it right all the time, right? I might get in a heated meeting where I'm pounding the table and I do something that if I were to step back and do a retrospective and reflect on it, I'm like, oh man, I was not in line with my values there. I messed up. Okay, now how do I go correct that? How do I fix it? I had a really good discussion with our people officer a while ago. He's like, I feel frustrated sometimes because I feel like we're doing the things that I'm not in line with, right? I'm like, do we all do that, right? Like, every day I do stuff that if I were to stop and reflect, I'd say, hey, is that in line with who I really want to be and my values? No, I probably screwed up to some degree or another, right? Hopefully not really far off, but I'm probably a little bit off in some ways, right? And I think that's just us trying to become better people all the time, is reflecting on, okay, I've got these values and I understand who I want to be and who I think I should be, and I'm not there yet, but how can I constantly try and course correct and get closer to it?
From a very secular perspective, I think you just described in the secular world what repentance is.
Yeah.
You saw what you wanted to change. You put the new perspectives, new behaviors, new activities in to crucify your old self and rebirth your new self.
And that is one of, like we just talked about, principles that kind of transcend across things. I think you can learn that through, like, the gospel. You can learn it through different books. You can learn it through just hard knocks in business or relationships, right? Like, but there's some principles there that you can learn in different ways through different authors and different things. And those universal truths apply to the gospel as well as they do anything else.
Let's go into the principle.
Okay.
I loved how you worded this, and I'm stoked that you actually said this. So this is how you worded it in your text: the importance of people feeling understood as it relates to leadership, sales, or any relationship. Why did you choose, of all the things you could talk about, why is that on your mind, or why did you pick that?
So this has just been my kick lately, right? I think I'm like any other CEO, based on the customers I've talked to lately, the things I've been working on in the business, the books I've read. Like, I have my flavors of the week or the month or whatever, yes. Right? And I realize I do that, and I apologize to my team because I know I do that. But lately, this has been my thing, right? And I just see time and time again when we're running into problems in the business, either where we didn't deliver for a customer the way we wish we would have, or where we're out of alignment with people in our team. So often, I feel like the core underlying issue is people not feeling understood. And there's a difference between me understanding you and you feeling like I understand you, right? And I believe that is the basis for trust. You are not going to trust me unless you first feel like I understand you. And so if you take it from a sales perspective, if I'm trying to, help you understand how Journey Team can help you grow your business, right? And we want to come in and present a proposal to you. If you don't feel like I understand you and your business and your goals and what you're trying to accomplish, you can't possibly trust that I have a solution that's going to fit you. How could I if I don't really understand you, right? And I think sometimes we make assumptions in that understanding. I say, oh, I met with Court, I talked to Court, and I've seen others like Court, so I know Court and I get Court. Well, if Court doesn't feel understood and I just make assumptions that I do understand him, I'm going to miss there and I'm going to be off.
Chris Voss, in his book Never Split the Difference, said the most important, he's an FBI hostage negotiator, and he said the most important thing you can get what would he call him, the antagonist or the person on the other side of the phone to say is that's right. Not you're right, but you have described my situation to such a degree where I can say that's right, because that's the path to open up all future negotiations.
That book has been on my list for a long time and I haven't read it, but since I need to go read that book now.
You don't need to read it now. That's the whole thing. You just got to get it to say that's right.
Cliff Notes. I love
notes. So is this something that is, are people born with this ability, or is this teachable?
I think it's totally teachable.
To make someone feel understood.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally teachable. Something you can practice. Something you have to learn in sales, in leadership. Something I think you want to do in any relationship. I think this applies to any relationship, whether it's with your spouse, your kids, work thing, whatever. Like, I need to make sure my wife feels like I understand her and what's important to her, right?
Can you give us a little master class on how to make people feel understood? How
to make people feel understood? I don't know that it's really that hard. I just think sometimes we skip it or don't do it. I really think a lot of it is just making that personal connection, taking the time to listen more than you talk. Listen 20%, let the other person talk 80%. And then I think what helps often to help that other person understood is repeat back what you are understanding and what you feel like you understand so that they can correct you or say, that's right.
Going back to things that are simple in concept but hard to execute, like the character things, that's super easy to understand. Why is that so difficult to do in a conversation?
I don't know, but it is, right? I think sometimes a lot of it's patience, and just we're all busy. We've got our list of things we need to do. We're short on time, and so when I sit down with someone on my team and they're expressing their frustration with me about a problem or something that's going on in the business, there's a natural tendency to want to jump to the conclusion, say, oh, yep, okay, I know what to do here. Let's solve it so I can get on to the next thing. And I think that's a blocker for a lot of us often. It's just that desire to move quick and go. And if I just jump through that, you don't necessarily feel understood. And so a lot of it, so patience, take the time to listen, repeat back, make sure you get there. Sometimes you can get there super quick. But I realize, like, in most of my relationships, I'm trying to make sure, like, hey, have I checked, like, do I feel like I've actually checked that box and I've confirmed that with the person that I understand what they're saying? They feel understood and they're like, yeah, I like that. That's right. Like, yeah, you get me. Like, that's what I'm saying. So I think part of it is probably the patience. Part of it, I think, goes back to ego for a lot of us. I think we get hung up with sharing our thoughts and wanting to be understood ourselves as opposed to make sure someone else is understood, right? So let's say I'm working with one of my leaders in the company and we're frustrated over a result we're getting and we're trying to figure out how to get there or what the underlying issue was. Well, I probably want to make sure he understands my perception of the problem. And he wants to make sure I understand his perception of the problem. And if we're both trying to be understood and no one's trying to listen, it's really hard to get there. All right? And we might be on the same page, but if I'm not listening first and making sure I understand him first before I try and make sure he understands me, I think that's one area where it clashes a lot. Is I think everyone has an innate desire and need to feel understood.
It's core.
There's a core desire there, right, to human beings. And when I let my desire to be understood get in the way of me first understanding you, I think that causes a problem.
Do you think that You know, when you said that helping someone feel understood is the basis of trust, my mind immediately went to the trust equation and how at the bottom there's self-orientation, right? So the more self-oriented you are, less people will trust you. What role do you think that plays? Can someone ever feel understood by someone who is applying all the right tactics, the right, playing back to you, they are, listening, they're patient, but at the core they don't care? Can that work?
I don't think so. I think if that intent isn't pure, if you're not truly trying to understand that person, I think it comes through. I think people can feel it because it's a core innate thing. I think you can feel when someone's not genuinely understanding you or trying to understand you.
You mentioned a coach earlier, and I have a coach as well I've worked with for the last couple of years. And you said being understood is such a core thing to who we are. I'm sure everyone has these, right? These fight or flight moments where your brain shuts off, your animalistic brain takes over, and all you want is to be understood. And he gave me this super good exercise that I've tried to start doing. And he said, when that happens, it's impossible to think. Like, your brain stops working, and so you can't rationally think through this process. What you can do is observe. And so for me, I know when I get into fight or flight, my eyes narrow, my lips purse, and my breathing accelerates. And so I've been paying attention to what are these visceral things that are happening physiologically with my body that are telling me you're in a fight or flight response. And the first step, he had me put together this when I, then I. So when I have my vision narrow and my lips purse and my breathing accelerate, then I take a deep breath, exhale for 8 seconds, and then ask myself, how is the other person feeling? And that process is so simple, but it saved me from, your life is always harder if you make a decision when you're in fight or flight, or do any kind of response when you're in fight or flight. But it's been so significantly helpful. For me, obviously it helps the other person if I can understand them, but I've been the greatest beneficiary of figuring out how to understand others.
Well, my guess is what that's doing is when you take that moment and pause and get out of saying, hey, I need to feel understood, you can get back to, hey, I need to make sure that person feels understood, right? And that's really the goal of this principle. The goal isn't that I feel understood. And sometimes I get caught up in that, right? Fight or flight, something's going wrong, I need to make sure my team understands me. Well, that's not helping them necessarily, right? Probably never really helps them, honestly, right? But when I can take that breath, take a pause, breathe, say, wait, okay, help me understand. What are you saying? Now they feel understood. Their limbic system comes down, right? Or their defenses come down because now they got to express themselves, which is what they wanted. They had that desire to feel understood, right? And now you can get back to, okay, let's reestablish some trust. Are we aligned on the goal? Now we can go solve the problem.
Tell me about that second half. So I think it's the third principle in 7 habits of seek first to understand and then be understood. Yeah. So tell me about
but you're spot on.
Tell me the impact on long-term relationships of not just understanding and communicating that you understood the other person, but then helping the other person understand you.
The long-term impact on the relationship from that?
Yeah, you could stop at, I understand you, but they might not understand you, or you can communicate to them, here's where I'm coming from.
So what I've realized as I've tried to focus first on understanding is oftentimes I don't need to be understood. I think we're misaligned, or I go in with the assumption that we're misaligned. But as I really understand them, I'm like, oh, we're aligned actually. So I don't need for you to understand me. Like that's been kind of eye-opening for me sometimes when I seek first to understand, or when I make sure they feel understood. How
does your ego feel about that? hey, you can sit in the back seat. We actually don't need you for this conversation. Just sit this one out.
And my ego gets hit all the time. You get used to it. I think when you're when you're leading a company, when you're growing, like that's just part of the job.
You're interested in the outcome.
And I think when you can focus on the outcome and the people,
The other person.
and worry less about your ego, like, okay, then it's not as much an ego hit. You're like, actually, if I feel back to those intrinsic motivators, honestly, like if I'm getting my intrinsic rewards from seeing other people succeed, when they express their understanding to me and they feel understood, I'm like, oh, he actually does get it. He is aligned. What should happen is I should be like, oh, cool, right? They can do it without me. That should be awesome. That shouldn't hit my ego because, hey, that means I'm building the person or the person's being built, whether it's me or not, and they're able to do it without me. Dude, how awesome is that, right? And if you can remember that, I mean, that's hard to do sometimes because I've got other intrinsic motivators, right? I want to be valuable. I want to have a part in solutions. Like I've got all those same intrinsic motivators all of us have, right? And so there's a little bit of that when, they can solve the problem without me. I think there's an initial gut check of like, oh, am I important still? Am I still needed? But man, if you can get past that, how awesome is it, right? They don't need me. They can go solve the problem and now I can go work on this other thing. That's fantastic.
We talked about a lot of good books, and How to Win Friends and Influence People has come to my mind like 8 times during this conversation. And in it, he says you could tell a lot about a man by how he gets his feeling of importance. And you've reframed your feeling of importance from how can I shine and how can I drive my success to how can I help others shine and drive their success. And it's probably, are there people that can... We've had so many people on this podcast and none of them fit the typical, like we have this picture of Steve Jobs or a book of Steve Jobs on the desk. None of them have been this maniacal, throw a fit type CEO that's portrayed in the media or that we hear stories of. They've all, almost every single one has been self-aware, tranquil in their approach, and focused on the outcome.
You're also catching me in a podcast in front of a camera.
All right. We're going to bring in the cameras in black suits.
Morning.
There's times I'm not at my best, right? There's times I screw up, right? I mean, you talk to my team, they're like, dude, yeah, he's not perfect.
Yeah.
Fair.
Monday at 11 a.m. That's I'm at my worst.
Yeah.
That's right during your team kickoff day, dude.
I'm just finished our sales leadership review and our executive leadership review.
It's when all the problems have come to you, right?
I'm at my worst.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think I just found an answer for something that I've been looking for. I had this interaction with someone that works with me a few days ago where she came to me with a problem, and then I just took a step back and I literally just did what you described. So I said, what would you recommend? Sounds like you're struggling. So just all of those tactics that we learn, right, in books. And then she just replied, stop with your strategy. I just need help. And I've been living with that for like a week now where, wow, like I just wanted to help her help herself, but she saw right through me. That was not the right time for me to use those. But I think the answer that I just received is she probably just doesn't understand how much I care. Like I haven't helped her feel cared about or cared for in a while. So that self-orientation thing, and mostly I go into a situation seeking to understand, to be understood, instead of just I'm there just to listen. I think I've been applying some of those tactics for so long with people, and when you work with people for long enough, people start learning how you operate, right? So she saw right through me, which now I'm getting an answer here in this conversation. I haven't invested in my relationship with her as I should have, and she probably doesn't feel like I actually care. Anyway, so I'm just sitting back and I'm like, oh, I think I just got an answer. I need to make some relationship deposits there, and she doesn't. Anyways, just adding that to the mix, because thanks.
That's awesome.
I have one more question for you.
Okay.
Ryan, Carlos, anything you want to ask before I ask it? Anything you wish we would have asked that we didn't?
No, this has been great.
This has been so
I love
fun.
you, man. I love talking to you. This has been great to get to know you, Carlos. So thank you, guys.
This has been amazing. I really would love to go and jam about Atlas Shrugged and the state of our economy and country and
let's do it.
We need to assemble.
how capitalism plays a role.
It'd be like a fun group
It's
discussion.
yeah,
rather
we
than
need to
just
assemble.
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
That'd be
I would
cool.
love that. Okay, last question. If you got to sit across from prior version of yourself and say anything, what version of yourself would you be sitting across from, and what would you say?
Man, you sent this on the texter, and I've thought about this today a little bit. And there's so much, but I think probably the biggest thing that I could have learned earlier, if I could go to myself earlier in my career when I was first starting to take a leadership role in the company, when I was starting to transition from contributor to leader, I think I would tell myself to focus more on getting the right who and then getting out of their way. Part of that would probably be back to, hey, today would be that principle of understand them first and make sure they feel understood so you can get out of their way. But I've been so fortunate in my career to just have great people around me. You've met some of my team. I've brought in some really good people that have been amazing. And I'm super blessed and super lucky that way. And even more so today, I'm realizing just the value of getting the right people, putting them in the right seat, and then just letting them do their thing, trusting them, let them make mistakes. And it took me a while to learn that lesson. It took me a while to learn how to transfer that ownership responsibly, to get out of the way, to be okay with mistakes. And I think I would just try and teach myself that lesson. Go find the right who, especially in the areas of your business that aren't your differentiation. Bring someone in who has a playbook, who knows what good looks like, and can just take care of that for you. And you can focus on the areas of your business that really set you apart. So much value in being able to transfer that other stuff and let people do that.
Love it. Brian, this has been amazing.
This has been incredible.
Thanks for joining, brother.
Thank you guys.
Sweet
I'm
new truck, by the way.
Honored that you'd want to talk to me. So thank you guys.
Thanks, Brian. That's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
Thank you.